Good evening. So tonight I'm going to try and put the transmission back in. I did have the transmission in there, but I had a problem with the bush that I had just binding up on the snub of the converter. So when I bolt the gearbox in, the converter wouldn't spin. So I had to pull it all out, just Dremel the inside of the bush, just so I have a good amount of clearance and it would not bind up. So I'm going to start putting it back on. I'm going to be putting the Volk bush in, pilot bush. And then I've got my Kiggly flex plate, the stock bolts and the spacer plate. So I will start with putting a little bit of anti-seize on the bush, put it into the back of the crank, and I'll start torquing up the bolts, and I will get into it. Okay, so now that's complete. I've fitted the flex plate, the spacer, the bush, and torqued it all to what I've found out is the right setting, or a high enough setting. I've done the first pass at 50 foot-pounds just to make sure it's all seated properly. I've then done a 80 foot-pound pass, and then up to 130 foot-pounds. So that's all torqued up. I've marked it as I went along. To make sure that's all done, and that's what the end outcome looks like with the bush in there, the spacer and the bolts. Okay, now I'll go ahead, bring the transmission over, replace the front pump seal, throw the converter in, and then lift it up into the car and get that in tonight. Okay, so I've just put the new seal in. That's all good. I put a little bit of transmission oil on it, on the outer and the inner, just so it's got a little bit of lubrication when it goes in. Also changed my axle seal. I had one that I just bought ages ago, it's just sitting in the packet, so I threw that in. So now I'll throw the converter on. While the gearbox was out, I just decided to give it a little bit of I gave it a scuff with like a wire brush, a nice clean over, and then just gave it a coat of paint just so it looks a bit nicer, better than that 30-year-old alloy sitting in the gearbox in the engine bay. Okay, I'll throw it in. Okay, so that's got the transmission in. It was quite simple that time since I've had it in and out a few times over the last week. A couple tips that I found to make it nice and easy is, firstly, I remove the pin from the front engine mount and jack that engine up, so I've got a little bit more angle downwards so the transmission doesn't have to come as high. I also took off the neutral safety component, because last time it was just binding up, trying to get the right angle. So without that, it just went in so easy. So that was a lot easier. I've been under the car, checked that the dowel pins are all located, everything's seated properly. The converter's still turning. Last time when I did it, the converter wouldn't turn because the pilot bush was slightly too tight on the inside, and the snub on the converter was just binding up on it, and essentially it was just jamming. So that's why I pulled it all out, which I'm actually happy that I did, because I got some other stuff done that I would always like to have done, like paint the transmission, change that front seal, just things that just bite you in the bum later on, and you'd wish that you'd done it for that small amount of time that it took. So now I'm going to just continue with just bolting stuff up. I'm also at the moment pulling out the four-wheel steering, so I've got a couple of things that I've got to do with the steering rack to seal up those lines. But once I come up with an option that works well, I'll let everyone know. But I'm going to keep going and give you an update soon. Thank you.